I want to introduce Chris Cinquemani. Chris comes to us from the Foundation for Government Accountability, which is in Ave Maria, Florida. He moved down here last September from Maine, where he spent 5 years in politics up there. His business partner, Taryn Bragdon, and he moved down here, like I said, to Ave Maria. This is a great resource, and I'm sure you're giving your webpage and everything else, but this is a new think tank down in Southwest Florida that we're working very closely with. They're playing a big role in helping us develop actually the 5-point plan that I talked about earlier today. Great resource going forward, so please get to know them and please welcome Chris.
All right, thank you everyone. I just need a second here to load up my PowerPoint. In the meantime, my last name is Cinquemani, as Slade tried to say. It means 5 hands in Italian, if there's any fellow paisans here. No? Anyone? Hey, all right. Ends in a vowel, last name? There you go, there you go. Well, my last name, 5 hands, we think back in the old country that we were a family of thieves, which probably explains why I'm trying to compensate for that by being such a radical fiscal conservative. There we go. Okay, as Slade mentioned, I am Vice President of the Foundation for Government Accountability, and we are a brand new think tank based in Naples, Ave Maria, Florida, and our mission is to energize free enterprise and limited government to secure future prosperity for future generations in the state of Florida. And the way we do that is by, 1, identifying policy dysfunction at the state and local level, and researching and advocating free market reforms to resolve those challenges in the pursuit of prosperity, new jobs, limited government, greater wealth here in Florida. The other thing that we do is we look around the state and local government here and see what's working. And we want to tell that story to other states and other government leaders across the country, because we believe that Florida is so important economically and politically that when Florida succeeds, America prospers. So that's our second goal, is to tell the success stories that are going on right here in Florida. But my background is not a policy background. My background is a communications background. And that's what I want to talk to you guys about today in my presentation, which is called War of the Words, Think, Speak, Win. To be effective and to win support for our ideas, whatever those ideas may be, we all need to be effective communicators. If we can't get people to pay attention to us, to understand what it is we're trying to explain to them and why it's important, we're not going to win. So what I want to share with you today are ideas on how to have an impact, make a point that sticks with people, and win new support for our ideas. And those ideas may be candidates, they may be reforms, whatever the case may be. So, influence. That's our goal, right? We want to be influential. And to be influential is the capacity or power of person or persons to compel somebody to change their opinion, to act a certain way, to understand a certain point. Today's tips are about having an influence. We'll talk about how to figure out what to say, how best to say it, like I said, to maximize your impact. But my main goal today is for you guys to leave here ready to think about new and clever ways to get a point across and to win support for your ideas. And you'll notice I'll repeat a lot of what I'm saying throughout this presentation because these are really important points. So, how do we influence people? How do we say the right things? The first thing we want to talk about is messaging. So if you look at this picture right here, that's us, the happy guy over there on the left. And we have a ton of things that we want to say in order to make our point. The person that we're trying to reach is the snoozy guy over there. So our giant circle is everything that we want to say. The guy who's sleeping, his circle is everything else that they're thinking about. Their job, their family, their health, who's playing the next sporting game, whatever the case may be. That little tiny sliver in the middle, that's the overlap. That's where what we have to say and what's important to us is also important to them. But just knowing what that is not enough. We also need to figure out how to reach that person effectively so that we can break through all the noise, wake that person up, and get them to understand what it is we're talking about and why it's important to them. And one of the key ways to do that is to come up with a good and compelling message. Now, a message is any thought or idea expressed in a language prepared in a form suitable for transition by any means of communication. And that last point is really important because you can deliver your message verbally, you can deliver your message through the written word, you can deliver your message visually. Any way that you're communicating with somebody, you can message your interaction with them. So it's really important to figure out what a compelling and effective message is so that you can keep repeating it over and over again so that people will internalize it and again start to move over to our side and start agreeing with us and supporting what it is that we have to tell them about. So in order to come up with your message, there's a couple of key questions that you need to ask yourself. The first one is, who do you want to influence? Now, yes, our greater goal is to influence everybody in the world with our free market reforms, but that's a bit much to chew, to bite off. So we need to really target who it is, particularly in an election, that are going to be most supportive and bring the most new support to our cause. So who do we want to influence? Is it single moms? Is it hunters? Is it small business owners? So these are the questions. This is the first question that you need to ask yourself as you're developing a message. The second question we need to ask ourselves is, what are they really, really interested in? So maybe you're trying to reach single moms, and maybe they're really interested in a quality education system for their kids. Maybe you're trying to reach small business owners, and maybe they're interested in how to alleviate the regulatory burden at the state or local level. So these are the things that we need to ask ourselves again as we're coming up with our message and as we're trying to reach those folks that we need to reach. The third question we need to ask ourselves is, how is what we want to say relevant to number two? So in order to do that, we need to speak in terms that connect with our target audience. Now, I want to give you guys an example from some of the work that we do at the Foundation for Government Accountability. One of the areas that we're very involved in is researching Florida's welfare cash drug testing law. Now, currently that law is temporarily suspended pending the results of a trial. The ACLU freaked out and decided that welfare accountability was illegal, and they got a pro-activist judge to agree. But we've been at the forefront of touting the welfare cash drug testing law as a way to not only save taxpayer dollars and increase increase welfare accountability, but we also wanted to bring in a new audience into people who would agree and appreciate what it is that the welfare cash drug testing law was trying to do. Now, with this specific welfare that we're talking about here, it's called Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. It is the only form of welfare that is meant exclusively for kids. If you don't have kids in the house, you cannot get this type of welfare. That was a point that was really important to us. So we wanted to bring in independents and parents into this conversation. So what we talk about mostly is not the fiscal savings, which are significant, but we talk about the fact that this welfare cash drug testing law was meant to protect kids. We should not be using taxpayer dollars to enable addict parents. When you have kids in the house, we need to be guaranteeing that our tax dollars, the generosity from the taxpayers, is going to put Wheaties on the table and not going to fund dime bags. So that's a way that we're talking about an issue, a very important issue, in order to bring new people into the conversation who may not agree with our fiscal arguments, but who's going to deny that we need to protect kids? So once you have your winning message, now we need to figure out, A, how to stick to it, and that involves message discipline. And I have a great example of that for you. But first, apparently, I want to talk about talking points. Once you have a winning message, talking points get a bad rap, and rightfully so, because you'll have a lot of politicians who try to spin their way out of questions by just sticking to a very narrow talking point that doesn't really answer a question or doesn't really say anything. But in their pure form, talking points are very helpful, because once we figure out a message, a talking point is a short and pithy way to convey our message in a way that's easy to understand, that people can relate to, and that keeps all of us focused as we're trying to deliver that message. So I want to give you an example. The Foundation for Government Accountability recently launched a transparency website called floridaopengov.org. And on floridaopengov.org, we post state employee salaries, state and local employee salaries, also government spending and government revenue at the state and local level. In order to effectively and in a focused way tout what it is that floridaopengov.org is bringing to the debate, we wanted to create a series of talking points that allowed us to quickly and easily convey that message. Now, I want to give you guys 2 examples so that you can figure out which is the more effective one. The first talking point we have is here. FloridaOpenGov.org was launched to enhance Florida taxpayers' ability to access information on how their tax dollars are taxed and spent, and to promote research on and analysis of public policy relating to Florida's spending habits. Who remembers what I just said? Exactly. How about this one? FloridaOpenGov.org was launched to protect and expand Florida taxpayers' right to know. The first talking point was 35 words. The second one is 12. In those 12 words, I said everything that I said the first time, but in a way that more people are going to remember and that more people can recall and that I can easily recite to all of you. So that's the value of a talking point. It keeps you focused, keeps things pithy, and it lets people understand an important issue quickly and effectively. So now, I want to give you guys a case study on messaging in action. And this is a story that I have to tell you from when I worked in Maine. In 2009, the Maine legislature passed gay marriage. Those opposed to gay marriage mounted a repeal effort to overturn that law. Now, it was a very expensive campaign, and both sides were very well funded, and both sides put a lot of money into coming up with a message that they thought was going to be the winning message. So I want to play you this video clip. This is from the pro-gay marriage campaign.
I have 2 daughters. The older one is straight, the younger one is gay. I was captain of the football and baseball teams. Then I went to the University of Maine and played college football for a while. After college, I joined the Marine Corps. It's just so important that people just look at other people, not what they are, but who they are. And I've been through a transition, and I'm just much more accepting of everybody. Everyone should be allowed to live the way they want to live.
So this message here in this ad was one of fairness and one of equality. And they had a great messenger, this military guy who was talking about how he wants fairness and equality for his daughter, who is gay and who's in a loving relationship. This was a winning message in the state of Maine, particularly the fact that Maine is liberal, and they also tend to have an independent streak, the voters, and more of a leave-us-alone attitude. When this ad came out, I thought it was pretty much over for the traditional marriage campaign. And that's what the polls were revealing too. 1 month out from Election Day, the repeal effort was failing. And you could see those who were in favor of repeal only had about 43%. Those who were in favor of keeping gay marriage on the books had the majority of the votes. Until the traditional marriage campaign aired this ad.
Opponents of Question 1 say that legalizing homosexual marriage has nothing to do with schools.
But it has everything to do with schools.
After Massachusetts legalized gay marriage, our son came home and told us the school taught him that boys can marry other boys. He's in 2nd grade.
We tried to stop public schools from teaching children about gay marriage, but the court said we had no right to object or pull them out of class.
It's already happened in Massachusetts. Vote yes on Question 1 to prevent homosexual marriage from being taught in Maine schools.
This ad was monumental. Not only did they have an extremely winning message of protecting our kids and protecting our schools, they had a great messenger. They had parents from Massachusetts that had legalized gay marriage. They had a teacher from Maine who was the one changing the channel on the TV. And it threw the pro-gay marriage campaign off their message. Once this ad started getting out there, the pro-gay marriage campaign started talking about schools and kids. They weren't talking about fairness and equality. When you abandon your message, that's when you're in trouble. So, what happened? The voters of Maine repealed gay marriage by 53%. This is an example of how you can have a winning message that makes a tremendous difference. Remember, 1 month out from Election Day, those in favor of keeping gay marriage were leading in the polls. Well, this was the final result, and it has to do with a winning message. So that's the power of having a winning message, and that's why it's really important to think hard about what that message is and who you need to be reaching. But it's not just what you say, it's also how you say it. After you thought about your message and what you want to share, it's really important to think about how you're going to say it, and it's not just with words. So what we're going to talk about for the rest of the presentation is a couple of different tips and tactics that you can employ or think about as you want to try to deliver your message and reach new people with a new idea to win support. The first thing is make your point make a difference. The second thing is clever beats complicated. And this is really important because this is something where, particularly in politics and policy, things are not always easy to understand right away. So there's ways to overcome that, and we'll talk about those in just a second. And the third thing is appeal to the senses. Humans have, 5 senses? The more you can appeal to and engage, the more memorable your points are. And we'll get to that in just a moment. So, make your point make a difference. Everybody recognizes the seal. This is on the dollar bill, right? Do we all know what the arrows represent on the seal? Okay. Security, defense, being strong, ready to defend the shores, ready to defend the borders. Some historians think it actually represents something else, and I'll tell you guys that story right now. This is Chief Canestego from the Iroquois Confederacy, and he was the leader of the Onondaga tribe. And the Iroquois Confederacy was an alliance of several different tribes meant to not only foster peace among the tribes, but also to create diplomacy with the British and the other colonial leaders at the time. He's what we call, what many historians call a forgotten founder, which is, an individual who was influential on the ideas that helped in the drafting of the Declaration and the Constitution, but aren't the ones that we typically think about. And one of the reasons why he's considered this is because of his interactions with Benjamin Franklin. Now, this chief often spoke to colonial leaders about what a good idea it would be if the 13 colonies established their own alliance similar to the Iroquois Confederacy in order to, again, foster that peace and foster that diplomacy within the greater colonies. He made that point to Benjamin Franklin in a very unique way, and I'm actually going to ask Slade to come up here and help me out with something. Slade, you're going to be Benjamin Franklin, I'm going to be the chief.
Okay.
Do me a favor, break this arrow in half. Come on, you could do it, make us proud. Off the knee. There you go. So, Slade, Benjamin Franklin, was able to crack this arrow in half, one single arrow. Slade, do me a favor, break these 13 arrows united in half.
Yeah, I'm going to break my leg.
All right.
I know I can't do it.
One arrow on its own, vulnerable to Slade's knee, vulnerable to attack, weak, very weak. Look, it's broken in half. 13 arrows representing each of the colonies, bound together with a single focus and a single mission. How are you going to break this in half? So, while the seal with the arrows, many think is about security and defense, and it very well may be, some historians think it actually is a representation of this tale of the chief and the arrows, and many of us know that Benjamin Franklin actually played a great role in developing the seal of the country. What the chief managed to do was make a very important, compelling point to Benjamin Franklin in a way that stuck. And as we all know, that was a philosophy and that was an idea that influenced how it is that the founders went about developing our country. So the chief made a point that made a difference. Next thing I want to talk about is this notion of clever beats complicated. And sometimes, as I said, we have something important to talk about that has a lot of impact on our lives as taxpayers or as parents or as citizens or as patriots, but they're difficult to understand, and they're difficult to get people to understand why these issues are important to them. Well, what better example than Medicaid, right? Florida has a very unique and positive Medicaid reform pilot that's taking place right now in 5 counties. But to understand what's going on with the Medicaid reform pilot, it helps to understand what it is that's going on in Medicaid in other states. So in old Medicaid, which is what many other states are still going about using, it's a big government boondoggle, right? It's unaffordable, it's bankrupting state budgets, and not only that, from a patient perspective, unique health needs of these vulnerable patients are ignored. Old Medicaid is a one-size-fits-none solution that rejects patients' unique health needs, and it makes patient health not a priority. Instead, the priority becomes, well, how are we going to fund this, and how are the stakeholders and the status quo defenders going to profit off our quote-unquote Medicaid reforms? Well, some states are turning to managed care, which is the reform du jour. And what that basically is it's old Medicaid specifications, but just with a private plan administering it. So the new plans are still bound by what the state has set forth in their Medicaid system. Florida's Medicaid Cure is different. As I said, it's a 5-county pilot, and it inserts market principles of choice and competition into Medicaid. So patients have more access to services, more plans to choose from, and they're healthier and they're happier compared to patients trapped in old Medicaid. And not only that, this county pilot plan is operating at some of the lowest per person costs in the country. In the 5 years that this has been in place, in the 6 years, that the reform pilot has been in effect, taxpayers in Florida have saved well over $100 million. Did you guys get all that, or was it like this? Okay. It's confusing. Medicaid is a very confusing issue. I've been working on Medicaid for 6, 7, 8 years. I still have trouble figuring it out. But how we talk about Medicaid and the Medicaid reform pilot in particular is we try to do something a little clever so that people can appreciate just how unique and innovative and beneficial Florida's Medicaid reform pilot is. So in order to tell this story, I want you guys to forget about Medicaid for a second, and I want you to think about building a house. Under old Medicaid, the state says, we want to have a Medicaid house. And the state draws up the plans for that house itself. The state decides which materials to use to build that house, and the state picks the developers who are going to actually build it. And the state is the one that actually builds the house. So they've designed it, they've picked the materials, and they're building it themselves. And what is the result of the state drawing up old Medicaid house plans? Well, it's this. It's a house that's old, that's dreary, that's leaky, that's run down, it's way over budget, and it's a house that nobody wants to live in, but that Medicaid patients are forced into and trapped inside of. Now, what about managed care? I spoke to you a little bit about how certain states are moving toward managed care. Well, with managed care, we still have the state drawing up the plans for the house and the state picking the materials. The only difference with managed care is that they pick a private developer to build the house. So what's the result? It's a little better, right? It's in color, but the house is still old, leaky, and run down, and it's still over budget. But what about Florida's Medicaid Cure, the Florida Reform Pilot? What happens there? Well, with this, the state says, we have $200,000, and we want Medicaid houses that have at least 1,800 square feet, at least 3 bedrooms, and at least 2 baths. The difference is several private developers are the ones that are actually designing the houses, and they're picking the materials, and they're building the houses themselves. And the result is Medicaid houses that not only are meeting the state specifications, but some of them exceed it. So you may have a Medicaid house that is 2,400 square feet, or you may have a Medicaid house that has a lanai, or that has an extra bedroom or a bathroom. And they're doing this for much less than the state is doing, and they're actually saving taxpayer dollars. So with Florida's Medicaid Cure, patients can choose among several different private plans, and the result is significant taxpayer savings and healthier, happier patients compared to those trapped in old Medicaid. So this house metaphor and building of the houses, what we believe is a clever way to visually show a very complex issue. Do you guys find that you understand the meaningful differences between the reform pilot through the visuals and through the clever metaphors, as opposed to, the hundreds of words that I had up earlier? It's a difficult subject, but I think this is a way that people can appreciate just how monumental and how different Florida's Medicaid reform pilot really is. Okay. I'm cranking through this presentation right now. Before I move on, are there any questions? Yes? I can't believe this. I can't recall them off the top of my head. If you go to our website, floridafga.org, we have a lot of research on the Medicaid reform pilot, and included in that is which counties are the participating counties, as well as the differences in health outcomes amongst pilot patients and non-pilot patients, the differences in patient satisfaction outcomes, which are much more significant than what's going on in old Medicaid. floridafga.org. It doesn't matter in a URL. Okay, let's move on, and then I'm happy to answer as many questions as you have at the end. But the next issue that I want to talk about is appealing to the senses. Now, as I said earlier, the more senses that we can engage amongst our target audiences, the more memorable we'll be. So let's talk a second about the national debt. That's on everybody's mind right now. And here's a graph that tells a little bit of that story. Between 1787, the signing of the Constitution, and the Declaration, and 1910, the nation accumulated $3 billion in debt. That's it. In 2012 alone, the nation will accumulate $1.3 trillion in debt. So this is a compelling graph, but are you going to really remember what's at stake after only looking at this graph for a couple of minutes? Probably not. So I want to share a different way to talk about this. And if I can have a volunteer come up here for just a second. Anybody? Anybody at all? Just come on up. Sir? You wouldn't mind, just over here.
Pennies from heaven.
Pennies from heaven. If you could stand over here, that'd be great.
Okay.
Sorry, thank you. So, what's your name?
Rich.
Rich. Rich is going to help me out here today. So we remember that obviously national debt is a big issue, but I want to show it to you guys and present it in a way that's much different and that appeals to different senses of yours. 1 penny equals $1 billion. So from the founding of our nation to 1910, this is how much debt the nation accumulated. $3 billion. Now, in 2012 alone, Barack Obama, Ben Nelson, our old friend Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and all the big spenders in Washington are going to accumulate this much. Thank you, Rich. $1.3 trillion. Now, what is more memorable, that graph that we saw just a second ago, or this incredibly loud, awful din of American debt piling up? Okay. So that is a way that I tried to appeal to your senses. It wasn't just sight, but it was also sound. Now, if I could have gotten these pennies to smell, that'd be even better. So, yes? I was still in high school, so. But I mean that's a very important point. I mean right now we're under Democrat-liberal control, but that doesn't mean that the Republicans who were in office prior to that should be let off the hook. And I think what you're seeing amongst people like the Tea Party and like the people here is, well, we're not just concerned about party, we're concerned about principles. So whether you're a Republican or whether you're a Democrat, if you're a big spender, you're going to be held accountable. And I think that's a movement that's really taking shape in these past few years. And it's probably a couple of decades too late, or not too late, but it could have happened a couple of decades ago and we would have been in better shape. But we're stuck with what we have now in terms of history, and now it's important to make sure that moving forward, our principles trump whatever politics and whatever big spending, that regardless of the party, that we can get things under control. So, I've appealed to your senses. I've showed you how to be a little clever. I've showed you how to make a point that makes a difference. These are all important tactics, and I'm not saying that these are the only tactics to use, but it's important to be clever because this is what regular folks hear every day. Blah, 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 blah. Hundreds of people on TV, on the streets, on the radio, just talking about all different things, and we need to cut through this noise to make our point, to convey an idea, and to win support for our side. And I hope that you guys will leave here today prepared to think a little harder about not only how to deliver a message and who you need to reach, but how you can deliver that message using more than just words so that you stick in people's minds, that you make a difference, and that you make points that people are going to walk away and remembering for days, weeks, and months to come. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Oh, there's a microphone coming down.
All right, the microphone's coming.
I'd like to address the question that the gentleman asked, because it is such a valid question as to what is happening today. The previous slide you showed is what he said, the blah, blah, blah that is taking place against the Republican message. What do you suggest should be the Republican message now? Because we are not where that is, we are here now.
I think that the message that's taking hold among Republicans, particularly conservatives, is a good one. It's about jobs and it's about the economy largely. And I think for the most part, they're saying the right things. But it's a matter of what we just talked about. How can they say the things and deliver that message in a way that's going to stick with people? And maybe they need to use language that's a little more colorful. You heard me earlier talk about the judge that temporarily suspended Florida's welfare drug testing law. Well, we call her a pro-addict judge. Maybe it's about using language that tells people and points out who people really are. But maybe it's about using hokey little gimmicks like arrows and pennies, too. It's a matter of getting things that are going to stick in people's minds. Yes, everybody in the country right now, or most people in the country right now, are concerned about jobs and the economy. That is the primary concern on people's minds. Every poll, every anecdote is telling us that. But to your point, we got to get people engaged and understanding not only that conservatives sympathize with you and that we understand that there's a problem, but we're ready to address that problem.
Just to further on what Chris said, if you all remember James's videos, he always uses sound or like good music and humor and satire. And if he were just to write a 300-word article, maybe nobody would read it. But because he uses something that's engaging and funny, kind of like Chris is saying, something to get your attention, we're able to get that message across.
If a point about James O'Keefe, talk about an effective activist bringing issues to the forefront. When I was in Maine, he actually did a, for lack of a better word, sting in the Maine Medicaid offices. And he filmed a Medicaid intake person interviewing somebody who was applying for Medicaid, or who wanted to apply for Medicaid. And this individual who supposedly wanted to apply for Medicaid, his name was Ted Kennedy. He lived at Acorn Drive. He told the individual, the Medicaid intake worker, that he ran a purely cash business, that he wasn't an American citizen, that his parents didn't know the income that they had, and he essentially alluded to the fact that his cash business was international drug trade. And his video showed the Medicaid intake worker saying, well, don't disclose that you have a Corvette on the application. Or, if you don't have pay stubs, then you don't have a job. So James brought to the forefront an issue of Medicaid fraud in my old state of Maine that drove a lot of the new elected officials in that state to take a close, hard look at ways to stop Medicaid fraud. And he did so by being clever, by being cute, and by making a difference using these videos that were very compelling and very engaging.
We don't hear anything, except for Michelle Bach, we heard absolutely nothing about earmarks. We don't hear anything about lobbyists. And the earmarks drive the lobbyists drive the earmarks. And the need to get reelected with a huge cost is what these politicians are saying one thing to their constituents and voting and doing everything else the exact opposite, crossing the aisles and making deals. And I haven't seen I'm not aware of what is being done to expose this kind of stuff more effectively, and I just don't see, if this isn't resolved, I don't see what we're going to do.
Well, if you remember earlier last year when Republicans came back to power in the House of Representatives, the earmark issue was a very big issue. It was explosive, and there was pledges in the Senate and the House to ban earmarks. And those pledges went through. Whether they're being stuck to or not, I'm not in a position to say. But what happened after the pledge was made is, well, the activity and the attention around that issue petered out, which you would expect. We would think that there was been a resolution to the issue with Republicans and with new influence and new power making that pledge. But just because somebody says the right thing at a specific time doesn't mean we stop watching them. What comes after progress is made is remaining vigilant so that you protect and reinforce that progress, excuse me. And I think on the earmarks issue, that's a very, very valid case, something that we need to continue to be looking closely at.
Well, the IMO service like Louis Gomer from Texas and so on are still pretty behind the scenes. We're finding out that they are doing it and making the case why they absolutely need to do it.
Okay.
We really have to watch.
Thanks. We're going to go to the question in the back here.
Hi, is your penny demonstration linked on your website, or is it on YouTube?
It is not, but I can certainly make sure at some point it will be. We do it for various different topics. It has a great impact, so I'll get it up there at some point.
If you put it online and send it to me, I'll get it to the crowd.
Okay, thank you.
Right here. Sorry.
Chris, if you could, my interest is in the 19 to 25-year-old. I have an informal mentoring group, and I'm exploring various ways to communicate with them. Some of the topics were on like Medicaid, Social Security, even jobs to a certain extent, since they're just starting to go out into the workaday world, are difficult to communicate the importance of certain matters that are now before us. Could you comment maybe on that and approaches that you might be looking at for some of these matters?
Sure. The youth is so hard to reach, and I consider myself an exception because I've been engaged in politics for many years now, but overall, it's an apathetic group of American citizens, and part of that is because these issues are so complex and they're so boring and blah, blah, blah. There are compelling ways, though, to present an idea to them, similar to what we just talked about. So, for example, I once worked with a gentleman who gave tours to college students across the country, and he was trying to help the college students understand what was at stake in terms of Social Security going bankrupt. And one of the ways he did that was he took an iPhone that was no longer in service, he put it on a table, and he smashed it with a hammer. And he said, you're going to have to pay the equivalent of smashing an iPhone every single day for the next however many years if we don't get Social Security under control. Some that was a very compelling demonstration to these groups of kids. I mean, what kid do you know does not love Apple products? And now to see some senior citizen economist guy smashing your Apple phone with a hammer to make a point that fiscally you're in trouble was a very compelling demonstration. So I think whenever you can try to be creative like that and use tools that are familiar to and important to the audience, in your case, younger Americans, it's certainly very, very helpful.
Just to add some information to the gentleman's question, Herman Cain is making the rounds on all the colleges. He's teaching, he's almost probably 3 or 4 a day he's in talking to them.
If just since you brought up Herman Cain, I have a very, very quick point to make. Earlier we talked about messaging, and I didn't get into it too much, but the notion of message discipline and how sticking to your message is very important and very helpful. Who remembers 999? I watched Herman Cain in those debates, and I was astonished at how effective he was at message discipline. No matter what he was asked, he managed to bring it back around to his 999 plan to reform taxes and create new jobs in the country. Now, the election didn't work out for Herman Cain, but talk about message discipline, I was very impressed. Absolutely. He didn't know what tax plan Romney had or what tax plan somebody else had until Herman kept talking about it. Sure. Are we done? Or?
Any other questions, or we'll take one more, unless you guys are, looks like we're ready to wrap here. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you.